Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Armitage. I think I know a number of participants on the webinar today. Welcome to the latest IMI webinar. Today we're going to talk about delivering IMI vocational and technical qualifications in the new academic year. There's going to be a number of things going on today. The session should last about 45 minutes to an hour maximum. We will be allowing some time for questions. So if any of you have been on one of these before, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, or should be at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to type in a question. We will either answer it via text or we'll take it away and make sure we come back to you with answers and include that in updating our FAQ documents. So today we've got myself, as I mentioned, Mark, and also joined by Lindsay and Adrian. Lindsay, if you'd just like to introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lindsay Mitchell and I'm the product manager. So I'm responsible for the teams that develop and maintain the qualifications and products.
Thanks, Lindsay. And also Adrian Marshall.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrian Marshall. I'm the External Quality Manager for the Southern region.
Thank you both. Thank you both. So as I mentioned, we've got a busy agenda. There's going to be a lot of information. Introductions are done. Tick. We can tick that one off. We're going to talk a little bit about, give a bit of a recap around something called EERF. Now, for those of us that are old enough in the sector, that used to be a truck that went around the roads. But this was the extraordinary regulatory framework that was launched by the regulators during the current pandemic that we're in to try and ensure that we maximised recognising learners' work that were due to achieve during the spring. I think we're all aware and all living, as I am, working from home still. As you can tell, this isn't an office with bikes and stuff in the back, but we're still working in some different situations at the moment, some more than others, and the regulators are now announcing the plans for an EERF, so an extended extraordinary regulatory framework. So I just wanted to give the opportunity and the time to talk to you all about what that may mean, because it may mean some changes, it may not, depending on which qualifications you deliver. And also what I wanted to talk through was some best practice. So this has come from you all that are on this session, and there's going to be 100 of you on this session today. We found some great practice out there during the last 6 months in challenging circumstances, and just wanted to take the opportunity to share that with everybody, just so that we can all try and support learners over the next 12 months to achieve the recognition that they're going to put the effort in for. So some good best practice section as well today, and then talk a little bit about same next steps. Thanks, Lauren. So EERF, what does it mean? This came out, as I mentioned, for summer of 2020. It applied to learners who were due to take assessments, so practical or knowledge assessments towards unit or qualification results during the spring, summer that we've just gone through. It applied to a number of qualifications from entry level all the way through to level 6 across all different awarding bodies and sectors and disciplines. And there were 3 main categories of approach. So calculated grade, which some of you will be aware, that was how GCSEs and A levels were counted for in the spring and summer, and there were indeed some of our qualifications that sat in that pot. Adapting assessments, so this was where there was the ability to adapt some assessment types, so either by providing different levels of evidence for practical competence, or indeed a different piece of information or evidence to cover off some knowledge. So there's been adapted assessments happening since kind of April time really, and that's been running through up to July was the key part, but we do have a a cut-off for the ERF, which I can talk to you about in a second. We also know and are aware that a number of the qualifications, either because they were licensed to practice, because meaning that you had to do a physical face-to-face observation, something like electric vehicle, for example, or refrigerant handling, that had to be delayed or rescheduled, or even down to different circumstances on your particular organisation or the learners involved in how you could actually access those individuals or have staff to carry out the activities. And what we found across all of our qualification range was most of them sat in adapt and delay. And I must say there's been hundreds and hundreds of lines of communication. The quality teams that Adrian's involved with have been non-stop in Zoom and on the phone since March, April time, working with in excess of 150 different training centres to support thousands of learners through to their qualification, which has been great to see. There was some exceptions, and that was around level 1, level 2 technical awards, and also entry level 1 qualifications, which sat in Calculate. So that was ERF. We've been dealing with this for 6 months, but as I mentioned earlier off qual, the regulators are now moving forward with extended ERF, which is how the regulators will be dealing with learners moving forward. So if you just go on to the next slide, please, Lauren. Here's where you may see some changes, but what you will hear about after this slide is some more detail in how that would work. So the extended ERF applies to all regulated qualifications, apart from GCSEs, A-levels and endpoint assessment. MOT qualification sits outside of this as well. And this is the government's intention now, that there'll be no provision for calculated results. So they've been quite firm going into the beginning of the year that they don't want any calculated results happening for the next academic year. The framework will be there to ensure that assessments lead to the award of qualifications and make sure that all the knowledge, skills, practical competence has been met and it's valid and reliable. What the framework does do, though, is it focuses heavily on what they're calling flexibility. So this is about how we manage assessments and qualifications, whereas adaptation, which was used in ERF, becomes kind of a default mitigation. So if delivery cannot go ahead as normal, then adaptation could be looked at in those really severe circumstances. But we don't have the 3 options as we had with ERF. So no calculate at all. That's been very clear from the government and from the regulators, but certainly moving forward with flexibilities and, if required, an adaptation. And as it says there, adaptations shouldn't undermine any validity and reliability of the quals. So the initial ERF remains in place only for specific purposes. So to allow any eligible learners to get their calculated result if for whatever reason that hasn't yet happened. And we may indeed have some of those learners that haven't been in the training environment, for example, or there's some evidence that's still being worked through at the moment. It could also be in place if there are any appeals for results that came out of ERF over the last 6 months. And the last and final thing, for those centres that have been running some learners through adaptations, if you have not yet finished claiming either units or full qualifications, that will be cut off at the end of October. So we've got the final few weeks to get those learners through. Thanks, Lauren. I'm going to pass over now to Lindsay, who can take you through some of the detail on EERF. So this is all about the future now. Thanks, Lindsay.
Cheers. Thanks, Mark. Hello, everyone again. So our approach under the EERF, we're about to go through a couple of slides for you just to sort of explain what that means. The main approach that we're taking this year, so for the 2020-21 academic year, so from now on, is actually more around flexibility as opposed to adaptions. So as Mark suggested, or as Mark described, sorry, adaptions are where you make changes to either the way in which a qualification is assessed or the structure of that qualification. And at the moment, our main focus is that we're actually just going to make the arrangements for carrying out those assessments more flexible. So they don't actually become an adaption, and I'll explain exactly what that means as we go through. So our main focus for this year, or for the EERF, is to be more flexible around, but not necessarily apply the adaptions that you've been used to using had you had learners in the last academic year. Some of these adaptions are that we'd like to encourage more remote delivery of classroom or theory elements. So we'd like to actively support and encourage remote learning, which we know will enable you to spend more time in much smaller groups, as we appreciate face-to-face in the workshop if you're able to plan that. So we are going to actively encourage remote delivery. There will be some exemptions to that. The common exemption of that is MOT. Face-to-face delivery needs to be maintained for that particular qualification, or that suite of qualifications. And we do have additional information for you on that. The remote invigilation policy is going to remain in place, and that's actually going to remain for the future. We've seen a huge benefit to allowing people to carry out online tests remotely, and we plan to offer that going into the future. So we would actively encourage remote invigilation, and we have help videos and guidance for you if you do wish to start to use that. So please do speak to your EQAs to make sure that you're set up and that they're happy that you're comfortable and equipped to do so. Changing the way in which assessments are delivered, so carrying out assessments remotely rather than face-to-face. Not always practical if you're doing a practical task, for instance, but if you have products or qualifications that have professional discussions, or you have some written elements that can be recorded via conversations and remotely, and you can actually record that and use that as evidence, we would actively encourage that to save the journey time, to save the face-to-face contact, especially if you do get locked down locally or nationally, hopefully not. Changing the way as well in which the qualifications are quality assured. So we're encouraging, as you can tell, very much digital first as a mindset. So if you're not already engaged with e-portfolios and other methods of electronic invigilation and marking of assessments, we would actually encourage you to move towards that. I won't steal too much of Adrian's thunder with this one, because that's sat within the best practice section of this webinar. But what we are saying is, by completing assessments electronically and having those physically banked, actually does support your learners, especially if you're trying to prove evidence that's been collected along the way, should we unfortunately be locked down and you're not able to get back face to face to collect that. So just to clarify, we're not outlining any adaptions at this stage to qualifications, which does mean we would like assessments to be carried out as they are intended within the assessment strategies. But we do encourage more flexible arrangements when it comes to, if you can assess remotely, then please do. So if we can go to the next one, please. Thank you very much. There will be a number of people on this webinar that have got a mixture of learners. So you may have some that you've not been able to contact at all. You may have some that you're still finishing off from last year from the EERF, and also new learners as well. And then I appreciate there'll be a mixture of all of those put together. So it's a very confusing and difficult time, I can appreciate, for you to carry out these assessments. We've set a clear deadline now. So if I concentrate on the left-hand column of this table, for the learners that were under the EERF, so any learners that were due to finish in the summer of this year, had it been a normal year, any adaptions that have already been agreed, so we're not agreeing any more adaptions, so anything that you already have agreed and in place with your EQA will be honoured for those learners. And we're giving you until the end of this month, so the end of October, to get those claims in, to make those unit or qualification claims for those learners. If you're not able to meet that deadline, obviously speak to us, but we'll give you a couple of options. So if you're unable to meet the deadline, but your learners are able to come in and join the cohorts for this year. Appreciate numbers might be an issue, but if you're able to complete those learners, say they've been on delay, or you're able to get them in to sit the last few assessments they have, then we would encourage that. But the learners from last year will either need to have their adaptions completed and all of it claimed by the 31st of October, or your two options are complete them with your current cohort, but there'll be rules that go with that. So that's the EERF, or unfortunately, the learners will need to be withdrawn if they're no longer on programme. So 31st of October is the date that we're giving for all current and approved adaptions to be claimed. Moving on to this year, so the EERF, any learners that maybe you've moved, so they might have been on delay from last year, or new starters from this year, will be treated under the rules of the EERF, which means adaptions will not be put in place, no adaptions will be agreed for them, and they will need to attend and maintain and complete the assessments as intended by our assessment strategies. So hopefully that's nice and clear. Your learners will either need to complete anything approved by the 31st of October, or they will need to be treated as new learners returning from a delay, and they will now have to complete those assessments as per the EERF, so without the adaptions. Thank you. Brilliant. And finally, this slide is just for information, and you'll be sent the links so you can go back and sort of note these down for yourselves. But we also have the information that was released by Skills First around both the legacy English and Maths qualifications and the functional skills at ICT level 1 and level 2. They have further extended some of the dates, but made very clear deadlines now for last take or last attempt on these assessments and last dates for claiming and processing. So that slide there is just for your information, and you will get this within the pack once the webinar has finished. Thank you very much. I'm now going to pass over to Adrian, who's going to go through the best practice section for you.
Thank you very much. Just clicking on the right buttons there. Good afternoon, everyone. Some of the thunder has been stolen, but that's not a problem. So over the past 6 months or so, I suppose, with this ERF, we have been supporting, as Mark said, and guiding centres with various elements of claim. And we've seen lots of good practice, and somewhere centres have needed a lot of help and still do need help as well. So we kind of had more of a focused, I suppose, event on it, really. So I was asked to put together these slides, trying to give everybody like a best practice understanding of what it is we were kind of hoping for or looking for. We seem to have jumped a slide. Let's go forward a slide. No, the other way. Thank you. So on here, just got some points on there. I mean, as Mark touched on, and as he said, we've been obviously covering all the governmental guidelines from Ofqual in the aspects of ERF expectations and the approach that's been agreed with other AOs. So we're kind of aligned with those agreements and statements. And we just wanted this like a standardised approach. So it's something we've been working on with the whole of the IMI and all departments to make sure everyone fully understands their responsibilities, the timelines that are involved, and the issues and kind of pinch points or worry items we've got. So everyone's kind of aware of those. The last time we spoke as well, I mentioned about malpractice if claims were being made incorrectly. And sure enough, we've had some claims that we've had to pull up and look at. But again, we try not to disadvantage any learners or even advantage learners, but we're trying to make sure that all claims are made correctly. So we'll talk about that in some of the slides moving forward. Again, there's been varying aspects of support. These webinars we've found to be really good. Basic question answering, emails and phones, all the ones you think of we've been doing for every presenter we've come into contact with, and recording all this information for when we have to obviously display it back to our regulators as well. So we've got there the COVID link as well for you. That's been added to after every webinar, and when we've been reviewing it as the quality team, make sure we add to it. So it's important that people have got somewhere to go to, because a lot of the questions have been asked, and we do have the answers for, hopefully. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for. Again, the North and South EQA teams, we've made sure they're standardised, they're a lot closer, and they continue to use panel review. So when claims are submitted from a centre, EQAs get together and review the evidence for a fair approach. So not just somebody's one opinion on the information that's supplied, but more of a an overview of North and South and different EQAs to come to the right conclusion based on the evidence that's provided. Now, looking here as well, we're still finding that the IQA sampling would be better if it's increased on the formative aspect. We're finding that where centres have been carrying out formative assessments, it's increased the information we have on the learner, and it's clear what learners have actually have completed. So that's something that we found as a really good benefit for people. Again, I've kind of touched on webinars. We've had additional webinars, not the ones, these wider ones that's been sent out. We've had some EQAs conducting a webinar for a group of centres or a centre that might have multiple sites, just to make sure that we're kind of meeting people's requirements, I suppose, in different ways. And this webinar seems to be a bit of a staple for everybody at the moment. So that's been really nice to see. Tracking has been a big factor as well. When we were asking for people to supply tracking around how their learners are progressing or what they've completed, did seem to be a weak point. And that's something that I'll talk about on one of the slides, kind of moving on. But again, this might not affect everybody, but it's something that we've kind of come across. Put on there the modular approach, and that's something that we're talking about with when people deliver their knowledge to the learners, carry out practice sessions, then actually the actual tasks they're going to undertake. So completing all the requirements, the online exam, and then actually kind of signing off that unit, so kind of banking it, we kind of make reference to. So it's very important if people who can do that. That's kind of an ongoing subject we kind of think will really help people. But communication seems to be the biggest thing that we're finding, and there's a lot of problems around internal, perhaps external communication, especially around claims, as I mentioned earlier, incorrect claims being made where the EQAs have agreed learners that can be claimed, and then the centre, for one of the reasons, has claimed different learners. So there's a bit of confusion. So we want to make sure that that's kind of tightened up and centres understand when they're making claims, that they're making the right claims, I suppose. So this covers all the requirements, the learner management side of it, and I suppose reading the correspondence we're sending to people. We want to make sure we're giving a clear message out there, because it has been trouble times for people, I suppose, and some places are just getting back to getting the staff back, I suppose, and getting up to full steam. And as Lindsay and Mark said, we're trying to get more people to look down obviously the e-learning packages or the technology aspects, I suppose, really, like the e-logbooks and e-portfolio we spoke about, and the Zoom and the team stuff we use, as we do believe in, as everybody else would do, it is the way forward. It's something that's supporting this new environment and the way learners kind of want it and need it, I suppose, as an approach for them. So if you get to the next slide, Fly. Thank you. So yes, I did have some thunder stolen. That's not a problem. So thank you, Lindsay, for that. But remote assessment, some information on here about from IMI strategy about remote assessment. I'm not going to read it all through, but it is available to use. It's something we want you to kind of let us know you're going to be using it. So through normal inquiry forms, kind of detail it. But carrying out full assessments is available by this remote assessment opportunity. We have people that are looking at collecting witness information. So during an assessment, you can question the mentor, asking them information about the learner. Again, candidate feedback can be captured and all the underpinning knowledge kind of question size. I think the thing we've got to be mindful of, I suppose, really is file sizes that seem to be obviously larger with the video aspect. So kind of breaking them up into perhaps a beginning, the deduction side of it, the assessment, maybe a feedback as a different section. But it's all something we need people to be aware of, I suppose, when they are videoing. It does seem to be a huge file, and I've been dealing with the centre earlier, unable to upload files due to this size, so we just use Dropbox that I've not used for a while, so that was really good. But I think this remote technology, we need to see what's happening, so introduction of people is really useful. Not the audio side, it's difficult it's difficult to hear on the audio who's who and trying to make comments about this people. So definitely the video side of it is really good. And just gives another aspect to some of the learning and the assessment opportunities that can be kind of picked up and honed on the skills wise. Let's go to the next slide. Don't be rushing through them. But again, something Lindsay did mention as well is the remote invigilation. Again, this is available. We've tested it. We want it to be conducted on a one-to-one basis, and we've demoed it with the Zooms and with Teams as well. And we've got a specific checklist as well. So we've got the documentation we'd like you to complete when you are carrying out this kind of activity as well. But we're conscious that staff need to be trained as well as the learners. This is a new style of perhaps assessing people through these online exams. And it's not that easy for everybody, I suppose. And it takes a lot of setting up. You've got to make sure that you've tested it prior to use. And I think that's something that's really important. You've got to be checking the bandwidth, I heard somebody say, or the connections they've got, because that's something that we can't afford to have dropping out, because people then start to worry about it and panic, and it puts another level of kind of difficulty into it, I suppose. But again, we'd like to say we've got a check sheet, and we want you to record, fill it all out, pretty much as you do on the exam assessment records. All the information needs to be there, but it's got to be done in an adequate place, as it says, and kind of away from any kind of risk. But setup is definitely the key, and that's something you've got to be familiar with. Invigilators have, as well as your learners. We had people showing around the room they were in with their laptop to make sure nobody else was in the room, and sitting there, and then the invigilator can take control of the laptop and kind of set it up. It was a really good aspect to see, something we're not used to seeing a room with about 10 people, all I suppose socially distancing away from each other, and a form being filled in. So the fact that this is a newer, I suppose, venture for everybody, I think it's a really good thing, and it can be a smooth interaction. As well as this, I suppose, for us looking at the moment, we're looking at proctoring as well. So I know other awarding bodies perhaps use this system, and it's something the IMI are looking at the moment. We've got to make sure that it fits the systems we use, I suppose, and kind of exams we have. But proctoring is something, like I say, we've looked at, whether it is a live one with somebody on the screen or a recorded version, which is something else we've been looking at. So different options available. Again, it's on the horizon for us. We know that Skills First are now considered offering it as well. So it's something that we need to move along, kind of move with the times with. So that'll be something that's coming out in the near future. Let's go to the next slide, please. So candidate assessment forms, or CAS forms, that internally we call them, available for all qualifications. Shows the images on the screen there, the top one little square on where you could find it on the qualifications page, and simply download and use. Now, we've found that there's been a bit of a benefit for people, even when they're using like an e-portfolio system. People have used these as a basic tracker for their learners to make sure the kind of recording development's ongoing. And as I spoke a few minutes ago about banking units, to actually fill out this form, to sign it off, gives the obviously learners some more achievement feeling, and they can
Hi everyone, not sure what's happened there. It looks like Adrian may have had an internet challenge. We'll carry on going through the session. Hopefully Adrian will join us again. So if we just recap back on candidate assessment forms. So as Adrian was trying to say, we do have all of this information available on the website. It's used in various guises. We've found over the last 6 months in particular, where centres have used them more frequently than others. But it is good practice to have this from the beginning of the qualification, and make sure that we can track learners' development ongoing, not just leaving it at the end. That's certainly one of the biggest challenges I think that a number of centres have found, is they previously may have end loaded some of these claims. Hi Adrian, you're back. That they may have end loaded some of these claims, and particularly with the circumstances we've had over the last 6 months, that's created some probably additional work for centre staff. So I think wherever possible, if this can be done piecemeal throughout the process, it means that there's a very clear picture of the learner's progression on a more regular basis. Adrian, are you okay to?
Apologies there. I've seen in and out of signal. Whether it's the weather, I'm going to blame the weather. Nothing else has happened. I was sitting completely still. My mouth was open, but so yeah. Sorry about that, folks. Yeah, rules combination we're talking about in the green. Thank you, Mark, for filling in there. And I'm going to talk on the next slide about set information as well. But yeah, whether you use ePortfolio or not, it's been a benefit for people to be filling these in, especially with the EERF, people supplying these and showing over a period of time how they've been completing them ongoing instead of just being end loaded. And I think that was something that Mark was touching on there. But I want to make sure as well that when you're choosing units, you're choosing them wisely. So kind of talking to the candidates, making sure that the units you pick are the units they're going to be able to demonstrate their ability and in the end, obviously complete. But also that you make sure that units you pick are the same ones you pick when you complete the e-portfolio system. So we've had a few areas there where they didn't match, or where people were part completing the unit and thinking they'd completed the whole thing. So a bit of a mismatch, I suppose. So using this document wisely, like I say, if you use ePortfolio, probably not necessary to use. However, for ongoing for paper portfolios, it's been a bit of a good thing to use, and kind of we've seen a benefit from it really. So thank you. We'll move to the next slide. Now, part of the candidate assessment summary is sets. So, and we found some people have kind of fallen a bit foul of this, which was quite surprising, I suppose, for the team to see. So the set, as it shows on the image there, is like a part A and a part B. So for a competence portfolio, it's the competence and the knowledge aspect. For a VRQ, it's the skills and knowledge. The evidence there just shows that as an LVO1SK, but it mentions the set information. So back as I spoke a few minutes ago about the rules of combination, this is where it comes from. And this is like completing a set to complete the qualification. When if there's your RPLN evidence in, so recognition of prior learning, or whether you're actually going through and completing them, it's important that these sets are complete. And that's back to this, as it says there, Group C, a minimum of 35 credits from 3 sets. We found that the people weren't completing a whole set, they were completing a single line, but then trying to claim the whole piece to it really. So it's kind of important that people are reading this information, and perhaps that was being missed on ePortfolio. That's something that kind of caught people out or they weren't too sure about. But in the past, people need to spend a bit of time looking at this minimum credits, the credits at the right level, and obviously the mandatory units, but the set information was something that people seem to be, I suppose, missing on. Again, back to the CAS form that kind of links to this, they're the kind of records we expect a centre to keep for GDPR for the 5 years when we're auditing it, kind of keep it ongoing, have it signed off by the assessor. The IQA uses it to mark off which units have been sampled as well. So it's an important document, but the set information, we were quite surprised that people had kind of missed that, I suppose, missed it as a trick. But so I just kind of wanted to point that out as, I suppose, good practice, being aware of it, making sure you meet that rules of combination, and making sure you're recording it ongoing. Next slide, please. So practical tasks seems a bit of a basic one, but they're so important. I think when we look at these documents themselves as external quality assurance, empty boxes seem to scream that they're missing evidence. I think it's important that the learners spend time filling these in, that all the details are captured as much as possible and as much detail are added. So use all the boxes, but make reference to elements. So if people are taking photographs, because they often do, we find a lot of people are taking photographs of the vehicles or the areas they're working on, please make reference to them on the actual practical sheet that there is a photograph with it, what it's called, where it's located. Because a lot of time we're spending looking at portfolios, we're trying to match evidence together. And there's obviously a route or connection that you thought of as an assessor when you're putting it in there. And it's just for us to be able to understand that with you as well. So recording factual feedback, really important to have this feedback on there. And so I know the form say at the bottom, if a person is referred, give feedback, but it's important to record this as well. So getting a lot of basic feedback, just well done, very good. I need a bit more from people, and especially with the EERF that kind of flagged up where people were trying to confirm what they passed or what they needed to pass. And these practice tests, when people are taking these practicals, they are perhaps taking it a few times and practicing. It's important to record those as well. The reflective learning aspect that learners can get from the positive and negative or supportive feedback, whatever you want to call it, is invaluable. But what we're finding as well is people aren't finishing each form off. I say people, learners, they're getting halfway through and it's not necessarily finished. An assessor's then not finished it. It's sitting within a portfolio being held. And it's important that people are taking time to make sure that the task is finished before moving on. Again, I mentioned at the beginning, banking assessments. To mark this off on your candidate assessment summary, to make sure this is the last piece that you're banking is important. So take time to kind of complete it, make sure it is finished, whether you put a tick in the corner, whether you add your initials, just some way of kind of acknowledging that it has been completed. But also, like I say, recording those practice tests. I know some of the manufacturers are cover it a lot, do a lot of practice tests before they do the actual physical practical that's recorded. But and that's helped them. Recording it is what it's all about. And I think perhaps some people have missed a trick. I think it's easy to catch up and kind of make sure it's fully correct and easy to audit. And that's what we want. And we want the candidates to be confident and happy about what they're supplying, rather than just filling in a sheet. It needs to be something that kind of records factual evidence and kind of matches their ability, what they're trying to demonstrate for their qualification. Okay, if you'd like to just move on to the next slide. So another thing that kind of came out of the EERF, and something that has been so individual for centres, is this tracking of learners. Really been helpful for centres that are, as we said, tracking practice tests, track the practicals, online exams, to have it in a table format pretty similar to the one on below the screen. And this is not something that I'm saying you should use, or it's not something we're offering. This is something just supplied. I asked on an EQAT meeting if anyone had one that was working, or they'd seen one recently, and this was just something that was supplied. So thank you, Grant. And I obviously changed some of the information, taken out, protected the innocent, as they say. But the colour scheme could be just however you want to do it. This one was potential, I don't know. Yellow is in progress, still being written up. Green was completed. Red may have been that they've failed to meet the required standard, or they were practicing it. But again, it's just some way of controlling what's happening. And I think, as I put on there to like record the units, the task attempts people have taken, the actual tasks, so the number of the tasks, because as you know, on those rules of combination, you don't always need to take all of the tasks. There might be 3 from 10 or 3 from 8. But adding things like the start dates, and if somebody's a late starter, would really be a benefit when we're kind of tracking this information or trying to find out about it. Because you're looking at all those learners on there without registration dates, or if there's any break in learnings, it's really difficult to tell. So the key could be yours, can be any kind of setup. We're not asking for a certain kind of line. But what I was also kind of trying to put across was if you match it to your scheme of work. So if you set up a scheme of work and you follow that scheme of work, and you set up your tracker to follow that scheme of work, you should be able to keep yourself in line and you should be able to work it out. But more importantly, as well, as I put on there in the brackets, is an EQA should be able to tap into this scheme of work and set up their planning against it. When we're looking at some of the IQA activity, people looked in a portfolio and it will say, I don't know, as it says on there, an L1 number, no evidence available when sampling this portfolio. And that's just a wasted activity for an IQA. So if they can plan it against a scheme of work, if they can look and see where people are and kind of make a correlation between the two, it's kind of going to save a lot of time and give the detailed feedback to the assessor, and obviously from the assessor then to the learner as well. So it's important. Again, important to with the withdrawal markers as well, and something I'll talk about just a few slides on is withdrawing people and having a good grip on who's actually registered against what. For us is really helpful, because obviously you make the registrations and then we see a name on a list, but it's kind of trying to find out if they are still live is something that is a challenge, I suppose, and we're trying to work with centres to make sure that it's correct. And finally, on there, looking for common units as well when you're planning this scheme of work, looking at this natural progression. Don't just work from a G unit down to the latter units and the C section. Think about how it looks and how you want to deliver this scheme of work, how it maximizes time in the workshop, and how it kind of maximizes their ability to fill these sheets in, because there is commonalities we know between this, and some tasks take longer, want practicing more, and the learners do get more from it. So kind of thinking about that, putting these things together, having a scheme of work, discussing it, putting more columns on this sheet, or making it work for you, is a real good way of kind of tracking people and tracking this learner's development. Again, on the electronic portfolio, it does have it. It kind of shows you the tracking of where people sit, what they've completed, but only if it's up to date. As with any tracker, if it's out of date, then it's not worth the electronic paper it's written on, or whatever you want to call it. But I think it's something that we've found that some centres were able to just hand us over their tracker. It's shown us a lot of information that we were looking for, kind of proved learners were retaking things. There was an auditable trail, whereas some centres were unable to provide any kind of detailed tracking, and kind of set them back, I suppose, and us back as well, trying to then dig further into information to make sure it kind of was valid and made sense for us. Just like to move on to the next slide. Take a quick. Great, thank you very much. So I've kind of touched on this on the last slide as well. Formative IQA side of it, it needs to be increased, not end loaded. And I know we've had some troubling times with people being furloughed and not being available to do this, and then we've got claims that's being made that haven't been sampled by IQAs. It's got to be increased. It's got to be a quality aspect. It's got to be as I put on there, an improved connection between the assessor and the assessment team. If it matches that scheme of work, it's going to make sense. They'll know when to turn up. There'll be date sets. They'll know what learners are in. They'll know what evidence is going to be available, or whether portfolios are kind of up to it a certain area. You better look and see whether learners are behind and take advice on that, or give advice to assessors on what they need to do. But we need this factual reports, and not just factual, but obviously supportive, guiding type reports that's going to put assessors in the right frame of mind and understand what's required for these portfolios. So feedback again is key, and it is a gift given to people, I suppose. But we want smart targets. There's obviously actions. We're seeing portfolios with reports in where the reports are still open. So assessor, please do this, X, Y, and Z, and then the portfolio's being put into claim. And then we question it, saying what's happening. Oh, you know, I've finished it. I've just not finished the form. So it's that attention to detail we're looking for. The fact there's a smart target, it's got to be time bound, because otherwise it just rolls on. And then when there's confusion, portfolios get claimed, and then it's backtracking, trying to find out where it went wrong or who did what. So it's important to set smart targets. As I put on there, recording and sign off the completed units, so banked, as we keep saying, which bits are. So reviewing that candidate assessment summary, reviewing it against your tracker system, reviewing against the IQA reports. So carrying out formative before the summative, so we're not going to end load it, really important. But we've also got to make sure that the IQA is involved in the claiming aspect, and that seems to be something for some centres is a separate entity, and we're contacting coordinators or IQA saying these claims have been made, and the IQA saying, I'm sorry, I knew nothing about it. So for us, that's there's a problem area there. We're looking at that. It's obviously non-effective and something that needs to be kind of stopped and protected. It's very important, the quality aspect. Obviously, this is us singing from our hymn sheet, but it's important. And we're finding at the moment, there's quite a few claims that are being rejected or being investigated where they shouldn't have been claimed. So disappointing to hear, but rest assured we are checking. This is what we do. We're checking portfolios. The team, which I know are watching this, do a great job, and we continue to do so. But I just think if people can make sure the smart targets, things are closed properly, units are banked, it's kind of progression or development on these learners, and these things won't happen. We'll be able to alleviate some of the problems and make correct claims correctly and confidently, and people have direct claim status and be as it should be, I suppose. And that's what we're looking for. Move to the next slide, please. Nearly there, sorry about this. So e-portfolio, again, during this COVID time, it's been amazing for us to be able to look at a portfolio system remotely. Has been really good. Now I know lots of centres use it, and I'm glad you do, but there's a lot of centres that do like the old paper base, and I don't like saying paper base in front of Mr. Armitage. It makes him twitch. You'll notice a little flicker in his eye, but it has been. It's the paper. We've had centres holding up paper portfolios to screens so EQAs can see it, and that's helped. I mean, that's been the best they can do. We can't visit people, but with e-portfolio systems, less likely to be lost. It's got better tracking on here as well. It's easier to review the completion, the kind of development as well. Again, we would still like to see improved assessor comments in there and IQA reporting, whether that's in part of the e-portfolio, whether it's paper, again, reports, or whether it's the electronic Excel type version. It's helpful, it's quicker, people can do it from their houses. We're looking at driving places to pick portfolios up, to protect them. We've had portfolios lost. We have a lost portfolio policy. People losing portfolios is a real thing. I mean, there's no need for that CAS we spoke about earlier. It's all within these e-portfolio systems. And as we said at the beginning, this new technology, I suppose, we need to be embracing it, not holding on to what it was. It's important to look for these new opportunities. And I've said that, as I said on there, there's other versions available. There's the One File and Smart Assessor. We are used to using different versions when we go to see centres. But the IMI is an ideal solution. It is on there. It's something we can use. And I was talking with the product team before we put this together, and there is a list coming out, I'm being told next week. I don't want to put a date on it. That gives us a list of all the live qualifications that will be now available on the portfolio, because not all of them were in the past, but there's been a lot of work trying to make sure it's up to date and it kind of covers out all aspects. But if you don't use ours and use others, like I say, that's not a problem. But it's something that we do believe is best practice. The paper side of it is a bit dated, I'm afraid, and like I say, easily lost. But there's time to move over, and I think the time, as I put on there, the time is now, definitely. Let's move on. So withdrawals, put on there that it's quick and easy. I appreciate you may not use obviously our web portal 2 all the time. Obviously we do, and we've seen it, but it's a development for us as well. So the amount has been increased to 1,000. It was before, it was a bit touchy when you went over an amount of 30 learners. But it's a fairly simple aspect to do. Using it, you can run your registration report on there. You can take it all the way back to the 1st of January 2009, add a filter on the top, take out your certificated learners, take out anything you've already withdrawn, go from oldest to newest, and you'll see the learners that's on there that are not on program anymore, not in learning. And they're the ones we'd like you to withdraw. Centres are viewed on risk. And if you're showing the amount of learners, a high amount of learners, in reality, you haven't got them, then the risk is not really there. And we'd like to see that you identify who is and who isn't, and then withdraw them. It's a simple process. Within the web portal 2, it gives you a breakdown on the screen on how to do this. And you can do it as a single learner. You can remove a part of a qualification, or you can do it as a batch, so multiple types of learners. Really easy. And then once you've got rid of the withdrawal learners, when you run a report, when you register people and then run the same report to find out you've certificated, you'll see if you've missed any. It's easy to see then if there's mistakes made with people's names. That's often, we've got a lot of email traffic, people spelling names wrong. I want to change the name around. So this is a thing you can do yourself. Run this report, have a look over it, see where it fits, see if it works for you, see if you've made the right information. But getting rid of the old ones is just so important as well. Another thing on there I've put about is, well, not mentioned on there, is unit claims. Now, people are at the moment making unit claims, and that still shows as a live learner. So once you've made your unit claims and you've got those kind of completed, you will need to actually withdraw the learner. It will just show as a live entity on their qualification as well. So there's a bit of work to do. EQAs are all over this and very eager to help. And it's something that they'll talk you through, help you, support you, whether it's via Zoom or when we finally get out again, fingers crossed, we'll be able to do face-to-face. But I think it is something that will really benefit centres to can get a real good, clear view on what learners you actually have and what learners need to be removed. Go to and that appears to be all my slides. So thank you. Sorry, I had to pedal through that to get through it. Conscious of the time. All these slides obviously will be available, and we're going to take some Q&A now as it goes through. But the links are all live, and you get information, and we're here to discuss it and support you. So good luck. Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Adrian, and thanks for testing our internet capabilities today.
I'll take that one. I think it must have been me.
These things
sneaked in.
These things happen, but thanks for taking the time to share the information. And this information has come from many of you that are on this webinar today that do some really strong practices to take your learners through to completion. what we have found in the last 6 months is that there's been some situations for many, many reasons where maybe under normal non-COVID circumstances, activities will be left towards the end, and we'll try and mop up the final bits of gaps and units at the end. And unfortunately, this year's kind of caught some people out, which obviously impacts learner certification in one way, shape or form. We've got a few questions coming through, and I just want to take some time, next few minutes, just to cover some of those off before we all finish for the session. Just to raise one point, there was a few people at the beginning that were having some sound challenges, but not everybody. So this has been recorded and will be sent out to everybody that registered for the webinar by tomorrow. So you'll get a recording of the webinar plus the slides in a PDF form with relevant web links on there for you to be able to hyperlink off to the websites, etc. So that should hopefully sort that out for people that may have had sound issues or may have been in and out during the session. You'll be able to watch it all through, share with your teams or whoever else you need to do. Just want to come on to a couple of questions, and Lindsay or Adrian, I may need to pull your expertise in here. So we've had a question from somebody who's obviously got learners in kind of an overlap at the moment. They were going into a following year. They started last year, and they're asking if units can be claimed from last year under ERF, but then move forward under EERF. So ultimately taking one candidate or one learner through a journey that covers two different frameworks. So the answer to that is yes, but you need to make sure that you claim those units by the end of October, and then continue through under EERF and the flexibilities that will be afforded to centres there for that session. So that question came from Stuart. So hopefully that answers it, Stuart, but you need to make sure you get the units claimed by the end of October if you haven't done so already. We've also had a question around ePortfolio. This would be for the IMI one, obviously. As Adrian said, what we have seen during this last 6 months is a number of people using varied digital resources, but we've seen that that's been able to keep candidates engaged and keep the progress levels really clear and transparent. But with regards to the IMI portfolio, Graham's asked if there's an ability to have a dummy student account so that you can show candidates how to use ePortfolio. I mean, I know all students will get their own login and you could show them that way, but Adrian or Lindsay, are you aware of any centres that have used a dummy account in the past as like a demonstration method?
I can't say I have, no. I'm not sure if it's a facility or not,
No.
but I can see the benefit from that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. Facility wise, that may not be an option or a role that's currently there, but we can definitely look into that and get a more detailed answer for you, but I would see that as a benefit.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I would.
Graham, you just take it that we will take that one away to have a look at. I know that you could let a student log in and obviously show it, but we'll take that away because it sounds like could be an improvement to the system. So thank you for the question and the feedback on that. We've also had a question from John, and I think this links to mainly around knowledge assessment, because he asked a previous question around knowledge assessment. And it's whether a college set assignment could be used to meet qualification criteria. So I think that's talking about an alternative assessment type for knowledge under a college set assignment. Under EERF, Lindsay, I know there are some rules around external assessment on some of the qualifications. I don't know if you've got anything more to add on that for John.
Yeah, so under the EERF, the answer to that is the online tests are the method for online assessments. With us being in October currently, it's impossible for us to predict how much of the time you will be present with your learners or locked down. So at this stage, the message is very much assessments to be completed as intended, with no adaptations to be made, and an assignment would be counted as an adaptation, so that wouldn't be approved at this time. It's not to say that in maybe 6 months' time there may be more guidance and something that comes out, but at the moment we just cannot predict what's going to happen. So online tests are the main form. For qualifications such as MOT, as I mentioned, but also for the performance table qualifications, those that deliver that will know there's an element that traditionally has to be externally marked. So under the EERF, even if adaptations are made, those qualifications will not benefit from those adaptations unless the Department for Education specifically tell us they can, because there is a proportion of those that must be externally marked. So that would be another exemption, that an assignment would not be allowed to be applied for that purpose.
Thank you, Lindsay. That's great. We've got a question from a Scottish centre asking if remote assessment can be used for Scottish SVQs now. Adrian, I know we have done some work, particularly in the Highlands, around remote assessment. So as far as I'm aware, that's all fine, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I think we just need to know when people are using it, how people are using it, and we'd like to review it with them just to make sure that they are covering all the requirements for it, really. So getting us involved, letting us know where you're going to use it, applying to use it first, obviously, but then yeah, it's something that's got to be used. It's a method that's being missed out, I think, and has been in the past. So yeah, please contact us, contact your EQA, talk it through, explain how you want to use it, how you're going to record it and conduct it, and then we'd like to review it with you to make sure it does meet the requirements.
Thanks, Adrian. That's great. Just looking through the question, I think we've covered most of them in one way, shape or form. Paula got a question around, which I'm sure some centres have got at the minute, where maybe due to social distancing or other things, the class sizes are having to be managed and the access to workshops, etc., is having to be managed. So some of this might be that terminology, but Paul's asking about if you're trying to get practical assessments through in what might be a smaller amount of face-to-face time due to the restrictions. Are there any allowances because there are no adaptations allowed? Now, I think we mentioned earlier that flexibilities are allowed under EERF, and particularly remote assessments that we've just been discussed may support that. But is there anything else that we could add to Paul to help him with his scheduling, do you think?
I think personally the advice would be for all centres just to maximise practical workshop time in the time that the learners are present. So utilise the time when they're away for theory and write-up activities, and when they are face-to-face, prioritise practical with embedded theory within those practical tasks, sort of complemented with a scheme of work. It will mean that you have to adapt the way in which you deliver compared to previous years, but personally my advice would be, and having been from a training background, would be to utilise the time that you have face-to-face for majority of practical elements with as much embedded theory as you can, so that you're maximising the time you've got and the time that they have to complete those assessments.
Just to carry on with that, I'll just say, like the scheme of work we mentioned earlier, look at the scheme of work you're currently running and look at commonality units and look at the way you're currently delivering it. Could that be changed? The way you've done it may have worked last in the previous months, but not now. So again, reviewing that scheme of work to see how it would fit better, I think would be a benefit.
That's great. And conscious of time, we're coming to a close, but a question for you, Adrian, really, particularly from the quality point of view, and it comes from Ronnie around in-progress sampling. Okay. I know that's something that we've certainly focused on the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I think what Ronnie's looking for is some advice around kind of frequency of sampling for him to best prepare his team and the learners.
Difficult to say, I suppose. I don't know how much sampling Ronnie necessarily does, but we're looking for your sampling to cover all your learners and all the units and all the assessment opportunities as well. So some centres go for 2 formatives a year, and then the summative in the final year. Again, if it's across multiple years, you're going to have to look at the size of the group, the amount of units you've got, and work it that way. But I would say visiting a portfolio twice in a year before it's signed off is a good way of maximising feedback to your assessors and making sure they're online. So that's going to have to be my answer. Not knowing how many he's got, but if he wants to contact me, I'll be happy to have a chat with him.
Thank you, Adrian. And just before we close, there's been a lot of information here around ePortfolio, people asking about training or access points and that kind of thing. And I think it would be probably really useful for us to do an ePortfolio webinar down the line. So to help centres that may use that at the moment. So, you know, that way you can keep the recording and share it with your teams as well. And there's been a comment around other awarding organisations and how they may or may not be similar to what we do, for example. And I know back in EERF, there's certainly some changes to calculate qualifications, for example. But some of you may have seen that in the last week or so, the regulators have released a statement that they're expecting all AOs to work more collaboratively going into EERF. And that's certainly what we are doing with the likes of City and Guilds, for example. And I know Lindsay's been in a lot of dialogue with some of those other awarding organisations. And just to say to everybody that there will be a collaborative approach from awarding organisations moving into this academic year as requested, if not demanded, by the regulator. Other than that, thank you all for your questions. As always, we will circulate these and update our frequently asked questions. Look out for what's probably going to be an ePortfolio webinar down the line, looking at, there's a number of questions around that. You can see the useful links on the slide here, and the bottom link is to where you can go and find what qualifications are covered by ePortfolio at the moment. Thank you all for your time and support. This has been recorded and will be sent out to you all, everyone that registered by close of play tomorrow, and then we'll go on to the webinar page of the IMI's website. But please take care, and we will be out and about and seeing people again soon, I'm sure we will. But in the meantime, look after yourselves, and thank you for your time today.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you.